So now we're moving on to the second part of our introduction, and I'd like to welcome Kristen Hay, who is the college's Heritage Programmer. We're going to do an overview of vaccinations and a general discussion, and then I get to be questioned myself. So, Kristen, welcome.
Hi, Morven.
Thank you for all of your hard work on this. And I'm going to start with a question just right about the inspiration for exhibition. So just tell us a wee bit about it and what inspired us to do this.
Yeah, of course. So the Heritage exhibition, or the 2022 Crush Hall exhibition, was very much inspired, like the exhibition before it, on the COVID-19 pandemic. There was a sense during the COVID-19 pandemic, and there still is a sense that this is a once in a generation event. This is a very momentous time in the history of Britain. And that is very true. But there's also a long history of pandemic disease. It's something that's always plagued civilizations from the earliest times throughout to modern society. And there's sometimes a comfort in recognising that these things have a historic precedent and that we are part of a much larger story. And rather than focusing on, I suppose, the villain of this story, the disease itself, we wanted to kind of focus more so on the hero, I guess, of the COVID-19 pandemic, or one of the heroes, which was the vaccination. And when the COVID-19 vaccine came around, there was a lot of celebration, there was a lot of relief. There was also a lot of hesitancy and uncertainty because everything happened so quickly. And the history of vaccination is also a long one, and it also has a long legacy. So what we wanted to do was to put on an exhibition that celebrated this long legacy, but also helped to contextualise the COVID-19 vaccine and public health more broadly.
So I know we were inspired by the COVID-19 vaccination, and we spoke about that last year, actually, in introduction to the last exhibition that we were talking about. But can you go into a wee bit more detail about the history of vaccination for me? That'd be really interesting for the audience.
Yeah, definitely. So the history of vaccination starts way back in the 18th century. And before we talk about vaccination, we have to talk about a thing called inoculation, or more specifically, what was called variolation. So at this time, there is an awareness that you can develop an immunity from an infectious disease. That's very well established in medicine. And what used to happen was a mild case of a disease would break out, people would recognise it as a mild disease, and they would pass it on in very arbitrary ways to build up an immunity. So that meant physically facing the actual disease itself. It's kind of similar to, I suppose, like chickenpox today. Sometimes if a young child has a mild case of chickenpox, you might bring your child in and it develops that immunity. There's this understanding that the earlier you get it, the better, because it creates immunity. But what vaccination is when you use a different kind of disease or a mild form of disease to build up an immunity. And it was discovered by someone called Edward Jenner. When working in Gloucestershire, he realised that dairy maids working with cattle often didn't present with smallpox, even if it was an epidemic within the surrounding areas. And then what he realised was it was because they were coming into contact with cowpox, which was a similar but different and much milder form of the same disease. So he had a theory that if you were presented with cowpox, you would build an immunity from smallpox. And he tested it out on a young boy called James Phipps. And he used a cow called Blossom, and I feel she deserves every single bit of attention in the story, yes. And he realised that when presented with cowpox, he was protected from smallpox. And smallpox at this time was it was a disastrously impactful disease at this time. There was epidemics throughout the 18th and 19th centuries in Britain. So to find something that built up immunity and resistance to smallpox was incredible. He tested it out several more times and then published his findings in 1896. And the rest is quite literally history.
How did he develop that further? How did it get spread? Because obviously it is throughout the world, that it's spread throughout the world. So how did that happen? Do you know a bit of understanding of that?
Absolutely. So Jenner published his findings, and we have a copy of his book in the college as well, which is incredible. And it's annotated everywhere. And I think that's a very good example of how this information reached a global kind of spread. He sent his samples of cowpox vaccine all over Britain to practitioners, including William Nimmo, who was a member of our college and actually performed the first vaccination, we think, in Scotland. So there was a precedent there. People were aware of inoculation, they were aware of variolation, but vaccination was a lot more simpler, it was more effective, it was more efficient. And when you're faced with a deadly pandemic, something that can protect you is incredible. So very quickly, we do start to see over the first kind of 10 or so years, vaccine stations getting set up across Britain. In terms of the development of vaccines, though, there isn't any similarities for the first 100 or so years, as in there's lots of different infectious diseases at this time, but there doesn't seem to be a vaccine for them. And that's got nothing to do with there not being a want for them. There's a lot of physicians during this time who go, right, okay, if this works for smallpox, then this will work for diphtheria, this will work for typhus, so on and so forth. But it's not until bacteriology, almost a century later, and the understanding of these microscopic organisms and what really the pathogens, I guess, for the transmission of disease, that we then start to see vaccines become more developed.
Part of your research was looking into what we have in our college archives. So tell us a wee bit about what you found when you were looking through there. So there was lots of exciting things I think we found. So
Absolutely.
tell about that.
So some of the things that feature in our exhibition is probably pride of place is our vaccine registers. And what the vaccine registers do is they tell the story of our vaccine station, which was set up in 1801 and ran to 1896. Now, what's amazing about our vaccine station is it's the only one organised by a medical professional body in the 19th century. So the college is really innovative in its application of vaccine. And that kind of adopting really innovative and at this time very experimental medical treatments and celebrating innovations in medicine was very much part of the college's kind of aims and values at this time. So they set up a vaccine station for Glasgow's poorest communities. And the reason that they do that is from the college's charter, there is a passage which reads that every single month the members of the college must visit the poor gratis. So they must support the smallest, the poorest communities and support them by providing medicine, by providing physic. So what the college do is they go, well, we have been visiting the poor for free, for gratis. What we can do instead is we can vaccinate them. And they do so for 100 years, basically. In the first 30 years, we vaccinate 30,000 children.
It's utterly amazing.
It's
when you think about the figures, it does seem like 30,000 people.
I know. For the time. Especially at this time, like as soon as vaccines were created, there is hesitancy around them. Of course, there's uncertainty within the medical profession, within the public. So the college has to really engage with the public, which it had never done so before in its history. It had been quite an insular body up until this point. So every single week they set up a vaccine station. 2 members are charged with being the vaccinators. They also influence public policy. So in the 1860s, there's a Vaccination Act, and the college, alongside the Royal Colleges in Edinburgh, are also very influential in shaping that act.
So final questions. What were your favourite bits from the archives then? What were your favourite pieces or elements that you took out that you'd like to talk about?
I loved the physicians' remarks in the vaccine register. So the register on the surface is it's names, it's dates, it's ages. So, John McLean's daughter, aged 6 months, received her vaccination. But in the margins, the vaccinator on shift that day, for lack of a better word, would make comments, and that very much again traces this kind of practical story of implementing vaccination that doesn't come, from it doesn't come from this idea of Jenner being this singular great man. What it represents is the everyday process of adopting innovative therapies, which I think is amazing. So there's quotes inside the vaccination register, which we'll show in our exhibition, things like, oh, this is the finest lymph of the season, because they've obtained some matter from somebody who, it's a very good quality lymph that they'll be able to then use to create more vaccine. They also talk about challenges, issues of people not coming back to make sure they've been vaccinated, because again, re-inoculation was a thing in the early 19th century. And it's just, it really gives you an amazing glimpse into the everyday life of a practitioner who was a member of our college, which I think is so amazing. And it's a very rare find to just see that everyday minutiae, I suppose.
I think the other part for me is that it was actually in this building for the latter part of it, also in our second college building at St Enoch's as well, which is amazing too. So it's the link between the two, the move from our older college building to our newer college building.
Absolutely.
So is there one thing that you've taken home, if you see what I mean, from doing this research? So we spoke about your favourite parts of it. Is there one thing that has made you reflect on from the research?
That's a lovely question, thank you.
Probably quite difficult to answer.
I think the biggest thing is just we are just part of this ongoing story, and there's this idea that the medicine we have today is the most cutting edge medicine that will ever be, and vice versa, that the medicine that has come before us is the worst version of medicine that there ever could be. And actually, it's far more complicated than that. The innovations in medicine in the last 200 years are nothing short of miraculous. And the medical innovations in the last 20 years are also nothing short of miraculous. And I think there is a real comfort in knowing that, as terrifying as the past couple of years have been, and as hard as the past couple of years have been, that we are part of a wider story, and our ancestors have been part of that wider story. And unfortunately, it will happen again, but by looking at the past, hopefully we can help to inform the future. And I think that there's solace in that for me, at least as a historian, to know that we're not as unique as sometimes we think we are, and actually we're part of this wider story, and people in the past know how we feel, and we know how they felt too.
Well, thanks very much, Kristen.